Hi, my name is Nikki. I'm the Obsessive Bookseller, and welcome to my channel. Today I will be reviewing Foundryside, the first book in the Foundryside series by Robert Jackson Bennett. It's a trilogy, and the third and final book, Locklands, is supposed to come out in late June. I'm already gearing up for it, and I haven't even read the second book yet. A few of you more attentive followers may note that I picked this book up on a whim. I didn't mention it in any of my TBR videos. It was one of those things where I felt like being a rebel for a minute, so I picked up something random. This is the one that won, and oh my gosh, I loved it. It caught me so off guard with how much I liked it. I prefer to go into books pretty blind. I don't read the back of the book. I don't even read reviews hardly. I read just enough to get like a gist of what's going on. And the only thing I knew about Foundryside beforehand was that someone mentioned in passing that it had a pretty good magic system. And just based on the cover, I thought it was going to be a pretty gritty, like, dark fantasy story. I couldn't have been more wrong. This was such a light-hearted, fun read, like, really played off of the things in fantasy that makes it so joyful to read. And I've been reading so many dark authors lately that being able to enjoy one of these more light-hearted books reinvigorated my love for the genre even more. Now, the first thing that clued me in to the fact that this was not going to be a dark tale was the audiobook narrator. At first, I had a really hard time with it. She had kind of a young, cheeky voice, and it's usually the type of profile that I associate with young adult novels being narrated. And so right off the bat, I thought, okay, I'm interested in this really complex, amazing fantasy novel. I really don't want to feel like it's, I wouldn't say dumbed down. I was worried that just by associating that type of voice with the young adult genre, that it would bring the seriousness of the plot down a little bit, just experiencing it that way. But it grew on me. The longer I listened, the more I felt like it really was a good match for the tone of the book. And I think she did a really good job enhancing some of the character profiles. So I started out on the fence, but ended up really liking it, but it could have gone either way. Now, do y'all know those books where people say it's got a cool magic system and you pick it up and it's not really explored to your satisfaction? Like, I've read so many where the magic system idea was really cool, but I get through it and I'm like, well, that really wasn't the focus of the novel, and if it was, it really wasn't explored very well, and it felt like an opportunity wasted. I can't tell you how many times I've written that in a review in regard to world building and magic systems. This is not the case here. The magic system is so much fun, and it was explored to its fullest potential, you know, within reason, because you've got to have stuff to save for future books, but I'm interested in reading those future books. I am so fired up about all of the discoveries we made along the way, and I love learning about how it works. It was completely integral to the plot, and it's kind of a hodgepodge of other magic systems that I've read about before. So the way it functions is very much like Sanderson's Allomancy in his Mistborn series, but the application of the magic is like his Emperor's Soul series. But then it also rang really close to Rachel Aaron's Eli Monpress series, where essentially the main character can communicate with inanimate objects and convince them to do things. And we'll talk more about that in the other books you might like section, but with this infusion of all of these fun systems and fun writers, this felt very much at home for me with stories in that same vein. And then there are other reviews I've written where the magic system was really cool, but that's really all the book was about. Like, the characters suffered, the plot suffered, nothing was robust except for the magic system. So that's not the case here either. The characters weren't the most sophisticated that I've ever read, but for the type of story, I felt like they were perfect. Really interesting, just a little bit of depth, kind of caricatures, but not in a way I hated. The politics of this world, decent, like passable. I really like the idea of these different houses all competing against each other to come up with the best innovations, and that's kind of what's driving the industry forward. And the fact that it is an industry-driven, like, fantasy novel, I think that's pretty cool. And I love stories that reveal more as they go along, and this had enough consistent nuggets of revelations to keep me interested, and this giant enigma of things to learn in future books that I just can't wait to get to. I love it. Have I said I loved it yet? I loved it. Overall, my rating is going to be a 4.5 out of 5 stars. It's not my all-time favorite thing that I've ever read, but it sure made a good case for itself. Like, easily one of the best books I've read in the last 2 years. And I think I've been kind of grouchy lately with some of the more lighthearted reads. I've been reading so much dark fantasy lately that I was a little worried it was ruining me for everything else. Like, it's so good and it's so rich and robust that I was worried that by loving that, I would not be able to appreciate a more lighthearted story. Because there are some things that happen in Foundryside where if they had happened in an Abercrombie book, no one's getting out alive. And you do just kind of have to go with it in some instances. But I was okay with that, and the fact that I was okay with that makes me really excited. I'm not as old and grouchy as I thought I was. So even though this book had a lot of elements that I've read in other places, the way they came together was slightly unconventional, a whole lot of fun. I love how he introduced the different characters. There's kind of a sequence of character introductions, and I thought it was all really well integrated. For an adult fantasy that channels the same sense of fun and wonder that you got when you were a kid reading Harry Potter and Fablehaven and all those things that make you just excited to be reading, this has those elements. It's got a little bit of sexual content in it, so it's not a perfect recommend for someone looking to jump from YA to fantasy, but it's definitely a lot more accessible than most things out there. So I'd say if you liked Mistborn, mayhaps give this one a go. And since I seem to be getting ahead of myself, let's just jump right into the other books you might like section. So this one takes itself a little more seriously than Foundryside, but the character profiles and the magic system and the sense of fun, especially in the second era with Wax and Wayne. Actually, this has Allomancy too, so I may as well just recommend this one because it's more closely aligned with Foundryside. Even the era that it's told in is very comparable. And I've seen mixed reviews on this particular trilogy, but I loved it. The end of Hero of Ages is still my single favorite moment in the Mistborn saga so far, but Shadows of Self, the second book in this trilogy, is my favorite in the Mistborn world. Hands down. Loved it. So anyway, quite comparable. Pick it up. And if you've happened to have read Foundryside already and Mistborn, then this is just begging to be read by you. This is a 3-book compilation, the Eli Mom Press series by Rachel Aaron. The first book is called The Spirit Thief. Very comparable characters. Excellent writing. I love the lighthearted fun of the story. He has a bounty on his head, and he wants to get an even bigger bounty, like break records, and to do that, he's going to steal a king. Loads of fun. One of my favorite writers anyway, so yeah, highly recommend. Next, Deadly Education. To a degree, the world building and magic system. I'm recommending this one for the sense of fun and the overall atmosphere. Both books were comparable in the way they made me feel. And the magic is just slightly bizarre, but wildly entertaining, and I really loved it. A Darker Shade of Magic by V.E. Schwab. The era that Foundryside was written in, the tone, the type of character profiles, the overall plot that leaves a lot to be explored in future books, and all of the things, I think this is a pretty comparable series. It's also one of those that would be an excellent crossover between young adult and adult fantasy, and I am finding myself starting to love that. Like, it's not an urban fantasy, but it's a high fantasy set in an urban setting. So it's not an our world, but it still takes place in a city. if not comparable political structures, but at least understandable, relatable. It's not like ruled by a king with a whole bunch of knights type of thing. It's very much like a structured government. Anyway, the very similar feel between these two series. And then because the magic system reminded me so much of it in combination with the Allomancy and the Eli Monpress series, I'm also recommending Emperor's Soul by Brandon Sanderson. In Foundryside, the way that the magic is applied is very similar to the magic system in this series. And I think if you like one, you'll like the other. So that's my review. Thank you so much for joining me on this video, and I hope to catch you next time. Bye.